Okay, share screen. All right, then you should be seeing my slides correct. Okay, so thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to present on Vivli, the Global Clinical Trials Data Sharing Platform. It's been a hard year for all of us. It's been a tough year. There is some light at the much needed light at the end of our long dark tunnel about COVID, and of course there's some very important vaccine trials that have just been reported, and we have so many questions that could be answered, of course, at the row level data. This is true for any of the research that we do, of course, the COVID vaccine in particular, but for both science and public trust and transparency, it would be good that row level data from clinical trials be available for a public health crisis like this one. So Vivli is a clinical trial data sharing platform. We actually already have 8 COVID studies on Vivli. What I'd like to do first is to show a quick intro video about Vivli. And let's make sure that that works. I'm not sure why my slides are not advancing. There we go. Okay.
Too many people around the world are suffering from disease, and every day, researchers are reminded of the urgent need to find cures. Researchers spend years running expensive clinical trials. Patients willingly give of themselves with the hope that taking part will lead to the next scientific discovery and insight. But when the trials are over, when their one question is answered, the raw data is often locked away, not used for future research. Participants in clinical trials deserve better. If we could reuse their data, we have the potential to speed up discoveries for diseases like dementia, diabetes, and cancer. That's where Vivli comes in. With Vivli, researchers around the world can search and combine data from different sources across thousands of clinical trials spanning multiple diseases. They can reuse data to ask new questions and uncover new clues. Our team is dedicated to making this process seamless, providing tools and support along the way. Vivli unlocks data's full potential by making sharing and reusing data easy. Let's put trial participants' precious contributions to better use and move faster toward treatments and cures that benefit us all. Get started today at vivli.org.
Good, so that was an overview. What I'd like to do is now give an overview of clinical trial data sharing and then get into the nitty-gritty of how Vivli can help you share your clinical study data, or conversely, how you can request data from other completed studies. So starting with sharing your study data for overview of clinical trial data sharing, I'd like to use Crohn's disease as our running example. Here's a menu of today's treatments for Crohn's. There are, of course, many interesting and pivotal trials on these treatments. And there are some questions that would require access to participant level data to answer both questions about efficacy, which subgroups are more responsive to some drugs over others. An interesting question, how long do you need to wait to determine if a patient responds favorably? That's the kind of data you don't get from a summary level report from a manuscript. You really do want the individual participant level data. Obviously, there are also safety questions that one might want to ask and how that correlates with subgroups, helping us not only to determine clinically how drugs might be used, but also illuminate the biological basis of treatment effect heterogeneity. Now, traditionally, when we have questions like this and we have published reports from trials, the way to answer these questions is with this summary level meta-analysis, perhaps using a network meta-analysis. But this is a rather blunt method, of course, because the summary level data does not allow us to do new subgroup analysis. And as I mentioned, it's harder to do time to event analyses as well. It also precludes your ability to adjust for multiple sources of heterogeneity. But really, for the longest time, we were stuck in really the exit-only lane. Summary level meta-analysis was really the only option available. Another way to go is individual participant level data, or IPD meta-analysis, where we get the row level data. Now, the pro, of course, in this approach is that you can now analytically control for most causes of interstudy heterogeneity, time to event analyses, and so forth. But the cons of this approach, primarily, how are you going to get your hands on participant level data from multiple trials from multiple sponsors? So this has been a problem for a while. In fact, it used to be well nigh impossible to get IPD from multiple studies, but really it's been a long evolution towards greater clinical trial data sharing. And that starts with the story of trial registration way back, actually in the 70s and so forth, when trial registration started to become an issue, but more so in the mid 2000s with the ICMJE, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, requiring trial registration. And then the World Health Organization propounding a global policy, and I worked on that policy, and that led to the FDA requirement in the US that applicable clinical trials be registered at inception. And that really was the start of a movement towards greater and greater transparency in the mid 2010s. Summary data was required to be shared on clinicaltrials.gov. And then over the course of that decade, also more and more discussion about sharing clinical study reports, which have far more detailed data about the studies, as well as summary level data. And then tentative moves into sharing participant level data as well. Since 2018, I would say that the impetus to sharing IPD is picking up some speed. Starting in 2018, the ICMJE, again, the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, mandated that all trial manuscripts must be submitted with a data sharing statement. And this is for IPD data, this is row level data, and you need to state in your data sharing statement who, what, when, where, why, and how of how you plan to share your IPD. Now, the ICMJE includes journals that we all like to publish in, like the New England Journal and JAMA, Annals, Lancet, and so forth. So they're really an opinion leader, and many other journals also now require that you have a data sharing statement when you submit your trial manuscript on trials. Some journals have gone a bit further and either routinely or request or strongly encourage that IPD be shared, and this includes BMJ, PLOS Medicine, and Lancet, and so forth. So journals being a strong incentive for us to change our behavior as researchers, that's starting to tip the scales towards IPD sharing. Also in mid-2018, Vivli Launch, so there was then a place for people to share data. We started in mid-2018 with 2,500 trials available, covering 1.3 million participants from 98 countries and 15 members. In 2019, you can see that we expanded our trials, the size of trials in our members, and more recently, about a month ago, we're up to over 5,800 trials covering 3.6 million participants from 119 countries. So definitely growth in that. In fact, Vivli is the world's largest data sharing platform for clinical trials. The momentum has continued. In 2019, the ICMJE move the bar. You have to actually now share your data sharing plan, declare your data sharing plan at the time of trial registration. And I don't know how many of you know this, but you are supposed to, if you intend to publish in, let's say, the New England Journal, that when you register your study, you should also register your data sharing plan at that time. This was a new field that clinicaltrials.gov had added, and so that is something that can be accommodated. And that's something you should be doing and knowing about if you don't already. And then looking forward, the NIH recently finalized a new data sharing policy that requires all grant proposals to include a data sharing plan. You can even budget for these costs. However, the data sharing plan will not be scored as part of peer review. The NIH does encourage use of established repositories, including Vivli, both generalist repositories like Vivli and sort of disease-specific repositories. This policy is coming in force in the beginning of January 2023. So we have about 2 years to prepare for that. This is a good target date to aim for really a new approach to data sharing that makes data sharing part of the process of science. Now, data sharing isn't all about mandates and shoulds and musts. There are benefits too, of course. They include honoring the commitment of participants, strengthening the trust in the clinical research enterprise by being transparent about the data and the protocols that generated those data, It prevents repetitive trials that might put additional patients at risk. And of course, scientifically, it enables new discovery, asking and answering new questions from the ability of combining data from different sources. And let's not forget also that there's some preliminary data that shows that if your data is open, that increases your citations as well. And the opportunity perhaps to collaborate with people who might be making use of your data as well. It's a new way, I think, of being a community member in science and to reflect that in increased citations. But sharing and requesting IPD is not easy. This is where Vivli comes in. We're trying to make the IPD lane an express lane. So introducing Vivli, we are a nonprofit organization founded in 2017. We convene all the multiple stakeholders in the data sharing ecosystem. We focus a tremendous amount of time on governance and policy and advocacy. And of course, we run a platform as well. So you saw the overview in the video. I'd like to get into the nitty-gritty of using Vivli, first as a data contributor and then as a data requester. How to share data via Vivli? Well, sharing participant level data is different from sharing summary level data like you might in clinicaltrials.gov, because we want to have openness, of course, that maximizes the value of the data that's been collected, and it also respects participants' contributions. But because it's participant level data, people could be re-identified. And so that we need to balance openness with protecting participant privacy. Now, if your study is in mice, then you can certainly lean far towards openness. With human studies, the equation is more complicated. So there are three major approaches to sharing human data. One is the complete open access. Anyone can request the data, find it, download it, do whatever they want with it. Perhaps there's a simple online data use agreement. Examples of that include import from NIAID, EMA, Project DataSphere. At the other end of the spectrum is what I call the walled garden approach. That's restricted access. Only the people who provide the data can access the data. So that might be a consortium of investigator teams in a particular disease like IBD for IBD plexus, data accelerate. There are many models of this where it's a walled garden, but if you're not part of that team, then you're not allowed in that garden. The middle way is managed access, where you do have to submit a request. Perhaps there's an independent review process as well. There's the opportunity to perhaps download data, but also to have the data access in a secure environment, and it's all managed with a clear legal framework. Vivli, along with other platforms like CSDR and SOAR, do use the managed access approach. And we found that this middle way is a sort of a sweet spot that balances the needs and interests of many participants. And so we've been able to bring on up to date 20 members now. We have many big and small pharma, as you can see here. There are NIH institutes, including NHLBI with BioLink and NIAID with Import. We have foundations like Doris Duke, the Helmsley Charitable Trust, rare disease organizations like Cure Duchenne, and academic institutions such as Harvard, Duke, Hopkins, and UCSF. So really a wide range of members that find that the managed access approach is one that they can participate in. Now, as a data contributor, when would you want to use Vivli? Because there are options out there. I would say that if you are fine with your data being accessible to everybody in a very unrestricted way, data sharing platforms like Figshare and Dryad, I would say, are the ways to go. Data can be stored there. They do have harmonized data contributor and data use agreements. You can't share data securely. Once it's shared on there, it's gone. People have a copy of the data. They can share it any way they want. No independent request review, and so forth. If you're only sharing within your own team, certainly your own organization's repositories would meet that requirement. If you're sharing only within a consortium, so perhaps a number of research teams together, the walled garden approach may work very well for you. There are very many different varieties of that, but that's an approach where people who are outside of that consortium cannot access the data or cannot search for it either. So Vivli tries to meet all of these different needs with wide but managed access. We do offer the option of free downloading, completely open access to the data as well, all the way up to restricted data with a request process, independent review, and access in a secure environment, as I'll show later. So this is how to choose when you might use Vivli. Let's step through the data sharing lifecycle. So when you prepare your grant, you will, starting in 2023, need to submit a data sharing plan. At the Vivli website, you will see a template for how to do that. So you just sort of fill in the parameters, and you can just sort of piggyback on all the functions that Vivli already provides you for data sharing. Similarly, when you register your study, you need to submit a data sharing plan, and Vivli has tools to help you with that as well. When you complete your study, if you wish to archive your IPD data package in Vivli, you can do so. The data package must have the participant level data, the protocol, the data dictionary, and the statistical analysis plan. Optionally, you can also provide the informed consent, case report forms, analytic code, the clinical study report, and so forth. 12 months after your study is completed, you should be reporting summary results to clinicaltrials.gov. And then when you do submit, you should be sharing your data sharing plan with the journal as well. When you do submit your data to Vivli, we do expect and require that data contributors sign a data contributor agreement, and that you agree that the data will be provided in anonymized form. I'll go over that in the next slide, and that you have the rights to share the data and continue to maintain those pre-existing ownership rights. Vivli, on our side, will agree that people who request your data have to sign the data use agreement, the Vivli data use agreement. I'll go over that in a little bit as well. So anonymization, what is that about? Because this is participant level data and there is a risk of re-identification, we do require that measures be taken to reduce the risk of re-identification. There are two terms here, somewhat technical. One is de-identification, where you just remove identifiers. It reduces the risk, again, that that person can be re-identified, but that person could be re-identified. Anonymization is erasing or encrypting all identifiers that connect an individual to the stored data. And that level meets GDPR regulations and so forth. So we do ask that data be anonymized. That's not something that most of us learned in our fellowships or our research experiences. We do partner with a company called Privacy Analytics. They're one of the world leaders in the identification of data. There is special discounted pricing and turnaround time for Vivli members. And they do perform that anonymization for you in a secure and audited environment. And they use approaches that are really best practices worldwide. Your institution may have its own partnerships with various organizations that provide anonymization services. I know UCSF, Privacy Analytics is also one of the partners with UCSF as well. But Vivli itself is a partnership with Privacy Analytics. Of course, you can do it yourself or with another company as well. The data use agreement, that's also very important. Data sharing is both a technical piece of work as well as a set of legal arrangements around it. So the data use agreement, Vivli manages the data use agreement process for members who use the Vivli harmonized DUA. This took a tremendous amount of work for everybody to agree on a single data use agreement so that people who come in and request data need to sign only one DUA for all the studies that are being requested. There are some member platforms, partner platforms who have their own DUA, but they are harmonized with Vivli's provisions within the DUA so that we can support cross-platform sharing, as I'll show in a little bit. Now, the key provisions of the data use agreement, if you're requesting data, is that the researcher agrees to adhere to the submitted research plan, that you make reasonable efforts to publish or to at least share publicly what you found from your studies or what happened with the requested data, and agreeing not to re-identify participants. So once signing the DUA and the DCA and having the data anonymized, submitting the data to Vivli. These are the costs, just to list it on Vivli with anonymized IPD storage. And this is, going forward even after your grant funds end. There's always the issue of archiving and who's going to manage it. What if somebody makes a request for your data 3 years from now and many of your study staff have left? Well, Vivli manages that entire process. And it's a one-off cost of $4,000, which is really about the cost of open access publishing, in that general range. And remember, in 2023, you'll be able to put these costs into your grant budget. If you think that your study needs to have an independent review panel, so you would prefer that people who request your data submit their research proposal and have that research proposal be reviewed by an independent review panel for approval, then there is a one-off cost, against just a one-time cost, $9,500, whether there's one request or many requests on your data, that would cover the cost of the IRP. For Vivli, the Wellcome Trust is our independent review panel. If you do need anonymization, as I said, there is a discounted cost, additional $2,000 to $5,000 per data set. That's quite a discount from standard pricing. So this is if you are a non-member, an individual submitting a data package to Vivli. There's also the option for an institutional member, such as UCSF, to sign a membership agreement to agree to the DCA and the DUA. And all our members post on the Vivli website a membership page explaining how they'll handle requests. And if you're interested in institutional membership, please contact Julie Wood at jwood@vivli.org. So let's say now that you've archived your data, what happens then is it becomes searchable on Vivli. People can find it. We do provide the option of an embargo period. Perhaps you're finishing up your primary paper, you need a bit more time before sharing your data. At some point, the embargo is lifted, and then people can request your data. And if approved, if there is a review process, your data, your IPD will be reused and tracked. So this is the basic flow over the life cycle of your study. Some of the questions that often arise when people think about sharing the data is how to be thinking about informed consent. Typically, data are shared in de-identified or anonymized form. Vivli accepts only anonymized data. The extent to which consent remains relevant following de-identification or anonymization, there are many different views on this, but I think the dominant common view is that when you make promises to the research subjects at the time of consent, those must be respected regardless of whether the data have been de-identified or anonymized. It's just it's being true to our trial participants. So 2 examples then of informed consent. One is informed consent that explicitly prohibits secondary uses of data. You may see here that your trial will, data will be made available to certain investigators and regulators. So that is stating explicitly who is going to get the data, and implicitly it's saying that the data will not be shared beyond the trial purpose, even if it were anonymized. That's how I think the reasonable person would interpret that statement. So the best practice, if you were to have this kind of informed consent, would be not using this data for secondary research purposes, but participants may be reconsented if there was an interest in secondary use. I think a more common use of informed consent is being silent on the secondary uses of data. There's no explicit promise made. And in this case, it's thought that secondary uses of data are permissible if the data are anonymized or de-identified. This is the increasing trend to actually explicitly require notice or consent to future uses of de-identified or anonymized data. So there are lots of regulations about that. I'm not the expert on this, but I think the informed consent practices are moving to be more aligned with this movement towards increasing sharing of participant level data. So that's about how to contribute data to Vivli. I'm going to move on now to how to request data via Vivli. So Vivli is agnostic to disease, to funder or data contributor. We accept trials from all over the world. This word cloud shows you the sort of the diseases that we that are common in the 5,800 trials that we have. It demonstrates the diversity and breadth of the community that we serve. So we can search on Vivli, and I'm going to try and do that now. We can go to Chrome. Okay. Did people see the Chrome website? I'm assuming that you do. So this is the search page to Vivli. Thank you. I do want to mention that we do have a COVID portal. There are 8 studies in there, and we expect more to come. So let's search for trials, and I'm going to keep up with the Crohn's example. And if we type in Crohn's, we find there are 64 studies. And let's say that we are interested in Crohn's and vedolizumab, right? Is that right? Yes, spelled it right. 15 studies. So let's go and take a look at them. And here they are, some phase 3 studies, some they're all on vedolizumab, on Crohn's disease, as you see here. There's one on LDP02, which turns out to be the earlier name for vedolizumab. And let's go take a look at the study details there. And we see, yes, this is a phase 2 study from 2000. These are the participants. And if we look at the administrative details, we see that this is a study from Takeda. And because this study had actually been requested before, there is a DOI for the data package. And if we look in there, we see that the CSR is in this data package, the protocol, the statistical analysis plan. There actually is the analysis ready data set in addition to the IPD and of course the data dictionary. So studies that have been requested will have a data package DOI. Some of them have not. And so, you're welcome to go to Vivli and do your own searches and explore our 5,800 or so trials on Vivli. So going back to our slide presentation here, there are, the requests that have come in have covered 18 therapeutic areas, as you see here, many requests in oncology, in neurology, cardiovascular, rheumatology, 217 requests as of November. I think we're up closer to 250 already. The number of requests are really going up. 7 of the most requested studies actually are in inflammatory bowel disease of Crohn's and ulcerative colitis. And for the NIDDK related studies on Vivli, there are over 400. These are some of the requests that have already been approved that are on diseases like CKD, DKA, type 2 diabetes, Crohn's, and ulcerative colitis. Been looking at the types of planned secondary research. It's interesting that 36% of them are new research, people having new hypotheses that they want to look at in the data. 25% are participant level meta-analysis, 6% are summary level meta-analysis. Confirmatory research, reproducibility, that sort of thing, is about 17%. And then the other category is really a grab bag of very interesting machine learning approaches to data, using data to build models to help with planning new studies, for example. So really excited about the kinds of different kinds of research approaches that become possible when we have IPD more available and people start being familiar with that and using them for different purposes. So I want to take the example of Dr. Vivek Rudrapatna from UCSF, who was one of our Vivli Pioneer Award winners. He was one of the first 10 to get data from Vivli. And he came to Vivli looking for studies on Crohn's treatments as here with this these criteria that he was looking for. So he did a search and then he submitted a request. And the way it works is he submits the request and the request goes to the sponsors of those studies. And each of the sponsors have their own publicly declared requirements for what they want to see in a research request and how they want it reviewed. So many of the time, these requests are reviewed by an independent review panel, the Wellcome Trust, as I said. And if the request is approved, then the sponsor provides the data package, the IPD, the data dictionary, the protocol, and the statistical analysis plan at a minimum. So if your request is approved, as Dr. Ruderpatna's was, he gets access, and the access can either be just downloading to his own laptop, or the data is available within the Vivli secure research environment, where there are robust analytic tools available. And then once the research results are completed, they will be assigned a DOI, and we do ask that people notify us of publications arising from their work on Vivli. So Dr. Ruderpatna in Crohn's identified these 10 studies covering over 5,000 patients. And you will note that these 10 studies come from 5 different sponsors. And these trials were available on data sharing platforms, Vivli, Yoda, and CSTR. So these are 3 separate data sharing platforms. So in prior days, Dr. Ruderpatna could have gotten at these 10 studies, but they'd be in 3 separate buckets, and there would be no way to pull all 10 of the trials together. Now, one of the distinguishing features of Vivli hang on here, is that we bridge multiple platforms. So here we see that the 10 studies from AbbVie, Biogen, Johnson & Johnson, Takeda, and UCB are brought into this, this one secure environment. We do have over 30 tools available, SAS, Data, Office, R, Jupyter Notebook, Python. There are many packages that are also available. We've recently added Spark and Anaconda as well. You can bring your own data and your own scripts and your software on request to bring it into your secure environment. When you're done with your analysis, you can remove your final data. You cannot remove the IPD that you were permitted access to. So we do have a review process just to make sure that you're not downloading IPD from the secure environment. But of course, you get to bring your work down out of the secure environment. Now, as we share this data, we are very mindful of fair data sharing. So our data is findable. There's a metadata model behind our listings of the IPD packages. They are annotated using the Cochrane vocabulary, which is a variant of SNOMED, the WHO ATC, and the MEDRA vocabularies kind of all wrote in together. We've been collaborating with Cochrane on optimizing the vocabulary for the kind of search that you see on our website earlier. You saw the DOIs, both for the packages and also for results, and that's minted by DataCite. The data is available, like, as I said, either fully downloadable or available only in our secure MS Azure environment. And that's, of course, is fully HIPAA compliant and GDPR compliant. One of the main issues of FAIR, of course, is to make the data interoperable and reusable in machine fashion. It would be wonderful if all the data sets came in harmonized to a common format, perhaps a CDIS SDTM. We do recommend that, but we do not require the use of SDTM or other standard formats. We just think that's just too heavy of a lift, especially for academics to comply with that. And actually, many of our industry data sets are not in SDTM as well. The other aspect that would really facilitate reuse of data is common variables, common outcome variables, common ways of stating things like gender and age. We have not required that. I think that's not quite something that a data sharing platform should do. I think this is something that the disease community can get together and decide what the common variables are. Of course, there are initiatives like this. CDIS has their therapeutic area groups, many others. The NIH, of course, has its CDE repository, the Common Data Element repository. So there's no shortage of common variables out there. I think we're not seeing too much sustained use of that, though we would certainly facilitate data reuse, and perhaps that's something we can discuss in our Q&A session. There's always a question of what have been the outcomes of Vivli data sharing. We have had 10 publications so far, and that's actually pretty good considering that our first data request was submitted in July of 2018. So not, only a little bit more than 2 years after. We've had 10 publications gone through the whole phase of data request, data review, request review, approval, analysis, and then submission, review, and publication. So we have 10 publications so far. You see the journals listed here. The scientific value goes far beyond publications. Here's an example from John Frew, who's another one of our Vivli Pioneer Award winners. In fact, I think he was the first to get data out of Vivli. He's been going gangbusters on data on hidradenitis suppurativa. That's a dermatologic condition. And here are some quotes from Dr. Frew. He was at a conference where half a dozen speakers, and I don't believe the research community is that big in hidradenitis suppurativa, they were already citing his research to rethink trial designs and outcome measures and whether multiple measures are needed. So this has already had an impact in the way that science is being done in a community. That's not going to be captured in any one publication. And I would argue in fact that is a much larger impact than a publication. That is part of science, is to improve the way we do science, not just the clinical findings that might come out at the end. So Dr. Frew says having all this data available in Vivli via the Vivli platform has been a key tenet to evaluating the epidemiological aspects of this condition. I love this quote, "This is beyond valuable." And we're hearing that from our users, particularly the ones that are able to obtain data from multiple sponsors that have lived in multiple different platforms that we're now able to pull together. That is allowing for analysis that could not have been possible before. So a comment about where we're going and some of the challenges that we are facing. One is academic participation. You notice from our slide of 29 members that pharma really forms the bulk of our members. Academic participation has been challenging, both in terms of people submitting their data sets and less so requesting data. Most of our data requesters come from academia, but certainly contributing data sets, academia has been somewhat of a laggard. And I think part of that is maybe less awareness of data sharing requirements as the ICMJE has required. And with the NIH data sharing policy coming into force in 2023, I think that is going to move academic participation, but still the NIH policy does not require data sharing, which is somewhat of a disappointment, but I think it's still a good forward movement on the NIH side to have that requirement for a data sharing plan. So having to put in a data sharing plan is an incentive. I think we need other incentives for data sharing. Citations is important. Institutions like Duke and UCSF are looking at including data sharing as part of your CV when you come up for a promotions review. So I think we need to be thinking about what it means to be a scientist, part of the scientific community, and the incentives and rewards that would enhance our citizenship there. In addition to academic participation, we have found that one of the big barriers to using this data is the lack of data harmonization. So it takes just so much work to just align the data sets together. Having data elements that don't align, if the endpoints are not at the same time, makes it difficult, if not impossible, to do a meta-analysis or any kind of cross-analysis. That is a challenge, of course. We do have our scientific desire to design the studies the way that we want to, but there is value in harmonization if we want our data to add up to something more than the sum of their parts. So I think there's a lot of work going on in that, much work over the years. I think we're still pretty early in that. And it really dovetails into this second issue here that I list under data, which is data stewardship from the beginning of a study life cycle. I think it's very hard for somebody who has conducted a very complex trial, as we know that almost all trials are, and at the end to say, okay, now share your data and share it in this way in SCTM, and tell us what your data elements are. Thinking about data sharing at the end of the study life cycle just is not as efficient as doing it from the beginning. And yet we tend to run our studies sort of, as a one-off in our own shops. I think we need far more infrastructure support for data stewardship from the very beginning, from our protocols tied to our data dictionary, tied to the definition of our data elements, to our data sets, and then on to the statistical analysis plan, and eventually the IPD. That's something that that both institutions and the NIH, I know, are paying attention to. But data stewardship, to me, is a huge challenge and opportunity for those of us in academia and, of course, in industry as well. And then finally, I think we do want to broaden our vision of what data sharing, what kind of benefits data sharing provides. It's easy enough to tally up the publications. I think data sharing will contribute to the process of science in a way that is really exciting, actually, and will lead to more effective science and hopefully better use of our scarce research dollars. And so thinking about how we capture that value, what those metrics might be, and then how to turn those into incentives and rewards as part of promotion, as part of grant review and so forth. I think that's something for us as a community to work on. So in summary, IPD sharing is increasingly expected. Vivli offers a managed access platform that balances the needs and values for both the data contributor community and the data requester community. I strongly feel that the greater extent that data requesters can get value out of the data, then it makes it more likely for people to want to contribute data. And when more people contribute data, then there's more value for data requesters to pull out of that data. So it is a virtuous cycle. And that's really what Vivli has been focusing on in our first 2+ years, is to initiate this virtuous cycle. So thanks so much to our members that put data onto Vivli as data contributors, to our Pioneer Award winners, our trailblazing data requesters. And now we're starting to see that reinforcing cycle of benefit. And we're expecting far more of that to come just even in the next year. There are a whole number of publications in the pipeline. And for us to start to define more broadly the categories of value that come out from IPD data sharing so that we can drive this virtuous cycle more and more. It has been incredibly important that Vivli bridges with other data sharing platforms. We are not the platform, not the only one. We're not a silo, and that's intentional, that we build bridges to other data sharing platforms that serve their own purposes, their own needs, and their own communities. But we're able to bring that all together to enable data from multiple sources to be combined securely. So we certainly welcome usage and participation from the NIDDK community. As you see, there's a lot of studies from IBD on there and diabetes as well. So please contact us at support@vivli.org, and I will stop there and reminding you that there are over 5,800 trials on Vivli for you to start looking at right away. So I've left time for questions. It looks like we have a reasonably small group, and happy to have a discussion on some really challenging issues, really, for not just for data sharing, but for the way that we think we want to do science going forward.
Okay, you can unmute yourself to ask question or join the discussion.
Hi, Dr. Sim. Thank you. This is Kristen from NIDDK, but a great presentation. Thinking about sort of incentivizing deposition and use of the platform, are there ways within Vivli that a data contributor can get credit when a data set is requested, so that then they can, I mean, I understand you can get credit once a publication comes out that's used your data, but it might actually, if there would be a way to capture sort of the interest in the data set ahead of publications, that might be helpful.
Yeah, so we have started that with a sort of a Vivli data sharing report. And so my idea would be, if you're coming up for promotions, that you just come to Vivli and you have submitted data, so you have an account name, and you just go and you just push a button, and boop, out comes your report of how many people have requested your data sets, right? Both the ones that you are the PI on and the ones that you're co-investigators on, and we can talk about how that gets assigned, because that gets a little tricky. How many publications have come out of your data sharing, and then you can just attach this report to your promotions committee. And if we could make that somewhat standard, then, then different promotions committees would start to see, oh, where's your data sharing report, right? This is something that I think the data sharing community as a whole could work towards. Vivli is sort of taking the lead and thinking through what this might look like. So we've talked to a number of academic institutions who says, well, we don't want the report just from Vivli. We want a data sharing report from all the data sharing platforms. So I think that is definitely something to work towards, so that people can know, just like you have your citation indexes and so forth, what is your data sharing status? So that, yeah, it's a great suggestion. It's something we're working towards. If there's any interest in NIH on thinking through what that might look like, we'd certainly welcome that too, but that's something that we're working on.
Great, thank you.
Oh, hi, Ida, it's Marianne.
Hi, Marianne.
Excellent presentation, and I want to really commend you because it looks like Vivli has been really extremely well thought out in terms of everything that it does and it will do. I feel your pain with the challenge of getting academic users for Vivli. Certainly, in my own experience, part of it is just advertising, that people don't know that these are available, and certainly dkNET is trying to help with that by making sure that we provide listings of what repositories are there. And I'd say that Vivli has really filled a niche, because we were getting requests for where do I share my clinical data? And that has always been a hard bar, because a lot of these repositories are not really set up for secure sharing. So we really are intending to really heavily promote Vivli. What do you think, just as a philosophical question, that the impact of the COVID is going to be on opening up and changing attitudes in academia and academic institutions?
Okay, all right. Yeah, let's go there. We have done some work, some preliminary work on looking at COVID trials and whether people are willing to share the data from COVID studies. And you would think if there's any time that you would want to share your IPD, this would be it, right? Right? Whether you're working on treatments or observations or long COVID. And I have to say, disappointingly, that really the interest has been really low. I think it's at the background rate, if not even a little less. So I think the urgency and the seemingly, clear reasons for sharing don't seem to be enough. And I wonder if it's that people, all of us are just working so hard and have so many other stresses that people they're doing their study and they're moving on to their next study. And sharing, because it's not part of what we normally do, seems like an added thing. And so, on the one hand, of course, COVID is exactly the time to share. On the other hand, COVID is exactly the time when it's really, really difficult to share, because we haven't done it before, and now you're asking them to do something they haven't done before. And there isn't that infrastructure support there for them. And so that's how I'm trying to make sense of it. I would hate to think that people really aren't interested, even in a situation like COVID. So I think that really, that's the lesson I'm taking from it. And I'd be curious what lessons other people might take from that as well, because I think there are real challenges. And I think now that the logistics of data sharing, I think, have been worked out. We can do it. It does have value. Now we need to really look at how to facilitate it. And that comes to tackling the challenges of data stewardship, the challenges of incentives, and then to drive use, the challenges of having data that's really, alignable at the end, right? That they can be harmonized at the end. I think those are the main challenges.
Well, I'm very disappointed to hear that, because I think a lot of us thought it might be an impetus, but as you say, it just might be early because we're all just struggling. But we very much agree, I think, that this all has to start from the point of production, right? That this after the fact sharing is in fact a major impediment and a major barrier. Mm-hmm. Is Vivli going to get into sort of training on how to actually start that pipeline a lot earlier, or with all you're doing, I imagine that would be too much, but it seems like it's going to be necessary.
And I think, you know, I wear different hats, as many of you know. So I think Vivli as a data sharing platform needs to be focused on its core mission, which is to facilitate, you know, the safe and useful sharing of completed studies. I think we're kind of, you know, we're at the pointy end of generating value, and a lot of challenges are surfaced. They're not necessarily ours to solve. So one way that we're trying to drive the conversation, you know, Harvard, Duke, Hopkins, and UCSF are the academic partners. And, you know, we're starting to think, what does that data stewardship look like? Like, how do we prepare our institutions for the 2023 deadline for NIH data sharing plans, right? So you know, perhaps thankfully it's not a requirement, but it is a plan, and we should be thinking about how to do that, and what do our institutions do? What do we need to do? What are the components of what we need to have in place? And certainly at UCSF, we've been thinking that through. You know, I'm thinking perhaps to use the CTSAs as well, because this is clearly a research infrastructure issue. I think one of the other challenges isn't only what we need to do to facilitate data sharing from the start of the clinical trial life cycle, what data stewardship looks like, but where does data stewardship sit within a research institution? You know, is it within the scientist's own shop? Is it regulatory? Is it, you know, IT? Obviously it is. But I think, you know, in some institutions, the library has a big role in this, and others perhaps less so. So I think we do need to be thinking about data stewardship as a core institutional function, and where does that sit? You know, data stewardship clearly is very important for EHR data, but on the clinical research side, where I think, you know, PIs tend to be more independent, right? What does that look like? So I think those are some you know, institutional questions that have to be answered even before we you know, start to practically assist with data stewardship.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Saul Molozowski from NIDDK. I have a couple of questions. Thank you very much for the presentation. Was any consideration to engage FDA, given the fact that they have the repository of multiple data sets?
Yeah.
And, you know, this data set, as you stated, get buried all the time, and nobody has any access to this information that could be extremely variable and could be leveraged for many different purposes.
Yeah, we have not engaged with the FDA directly. I think in terms of data contributors, we do look to see that people have, you know, the right to share the data. And the FDA, you know, this has been an ongoing conversation, right, about whether or not they can share the data that they have that have been submitted to them for regulatory review.
Okay.
And our approach has really been to go to the sponsors directly. And as you see, many sponsors are partnered with Vivli, and so they are willing to share their data even without the FDA. So I think that's the path that we're pursuing at the moment.
Therefore, this was my second question regarding the sponsors. What is the level of granularity vis-a-vis all the things they are doing, and what kind of data are they sharing, and what kind of data they are not sharing?
Yes. Ideally, we would like all data to be shared. And I think, you know, that's was my thought at the beginning when I started, you know, the clinical trial data sharing thing. Is, you know, as was mentioned earlier, this was really the core of my dissertation, was the technical infrastructure for sharing data in a way that's fully transparent and as complete as possible. Hitting the real world, I think our approach at Vivli is to meet people where they are. And if people don't want to share everything, but they're willing to share some, we'll take the some first. And we're finding that over time, groups are more and more willing to share. I think at the beginning, you know, I was on the IOM panel in 2015, and there was a lot of skepticism that anybody would even want to share. And if you shared, then it would be awful. The world would collapse, and you know, people would be suing you, and you know, patients would be harmed because data would be misinterpreted. And really, since then, we have not found a single case of misuse of data that was really consequential. And I think as that experience has really solidified over these years, that people are more and more willing to share. And I do hope that over time that people will be sharing, you know, more and more, if not all their data. Do we know what's not being shared? Not really, but I think again, it's trying to build those connections of trust with our sponsors, and it's certainly with academics too. You know, it's academics actually that violate a lot of these ideals. That we build trust with our data requester and our data contributor communities to move towards the kind of world that I think both you and I would like to see.